Madam Secretary, just as a suggestion, I shared the concern of both of the previous questioners about the exit strategy, about a date certain, and I was relieved when the President made his speech. I guess it was, well, anyway, whichever one it said, just as we have done in Iraq, we will execute this transition responsibly, taking into account conditions on the ground. Well, that's the position that I wanted him to take, and I was relieved to hear that. The problem is I've only heard it once. I asked staff after the meeting yesterday to go back and check and see if they've seen that, any emphasis on that by the President. I would recommend that that be done, that he keeps saying that, and that the administration does it, and certainly General Petraeus and others, because that clarifies it and makes it clear. But without that, only having said it once, I think there's a little bit of a problem there. Let me ask you a question, General Petraeus, and you've heard me talk about this before. And you know that I have a very strong feeling about the CERP program. You talked about it in your opening comments. We had the CERP program from the budget that came from the President. It was at $1.3 billion, and this was comprised of $200 million in Iraq and $1.1 billion in CERP. Now, this committee, and I respect them for doing what they felt was the right thing, I disagreed with it, has lowered that so that it takes the amount that goes to Afghanistan from $1.1 billion down to $800 million. Now, I'd like to ask you your feeling about that, and how valuable is the program, and how would you use it? Then the second part of that question is, and you had said this, Madam Secretary, that the McChrystal needs more operational flexibility. I think we need that in the CERP program, because in talking my last trip over there as to what needs are there that could come from the CERP program, something that could be done fast, would be power stations, grid, dam projects. However, this CERP has restrictions due to the statute, so that money can't necessarily be spent on this type of projects. So the second part of the question would be, do we need to change the language, either one of you, and I'd say particularly you, General Petraeus, to be able to accomplish these things that people in the field told me we should be spending it on?
Senator, thanks for that. First of all, the President actually has described what you quoted him on in a number of different occasions, and I'd come back to the West Point speech in particular, where these very important words, responsible drawdown, were used. That, again, that just almost like vital national interest, that has been a code word for those of us who went through the Iraq policy review, at the end of which the President announced the responsible drawdown, and as you'll recall, lengthened the time over that which was expected earlier. And we are in the process of doing that, and touch wood, we think it is on track, and it will be at the 50,000 number by the end of August, by the way. With respect to the CERP for Afghanistan, we do need the full amount, Senator, and it is very valuable. You asked about that. We now, as I mentioned in my opening statement yesterday, have the inputs just about right. Certainly another 9,000 troopers to get on the ground, and some of our NATO partners as well. But as we get everybody in position, as we get them out performing their tasks and trying to wrest the initiative from the Taliban, take away their sanctuaries, and then capitalize on that. CERP is critical to that process. Now, someone may ask, well, how come the execution rate, the obligation rate this year so far is low? In part because we're just building up still. Again, we actually are doing many more projects. They're actually lower cost is another issue. But beyond that, we do indeed have projects that are stacked up right now. We just have submitted them, in fact, and OSD is working on this, and I'll let the Secretary talk about these projects for electrification in particular in the Kandahar, Greater Regional Command South, and Regional Command East areas.
Senator, let me just echo, we think that CERP is an absolutely critical and flexible counterinsurgency tool. We would urge the committee to consider restoring the funding that was removed. In the specific case of the electrical projects in Kandahar, again, it's a very critical element of the fight. We think it directly impacts the population that we're trying to protect and win over to support the ISAF and the Afghan government. The projects have been developed in close coordination with AID, with a bridging strategy that would eventually hand off to longer-term development efforts. CENTCOM has submitted these proposals. They're being reviewed quickly in the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and we'll be making a recommendation to the Secretary very shortly. We do not judge at this point that the language needs to be changed. Our reading of the language and those of our lawyers, our trustee lawyers, suggests that the flexibility is there to do this kind of thing.
Okay, we're running out of time here, but I would only suggest this, that this is information I got from the field, that there are things that we could use that we are restricted from using. So perhaps for the record, you could elaborate a little bit, both of you, on that and maybe send us something. I'm running out of time here. Let me just mention one of the things that is I have a hard time answering when I talk to people. They talk about, well, the surge was successful in Iraq. The surge, however, in Iraq, we ended up with close to 165,000 troops in a period of time of 18 months. Now we're looking at a surge that might be about 100,000 troops and talking about 9 months. Now, considering that Afghanistan is about twice the size of Iraq, this disparity it's hard for me to describe to people why this number will work in Afghanistan when it took so much more in Iraq. General Petraeus, do you have any thoughts I could share with these people?
I do, Senator. Thank you. First of all, with respect on the timing of the actual surge in Iraq, we had all of the surge forces on the ground by end of June, July-ish in there, and we actually began the drawdown of the 1st Brigade in December. We then did lengthen it out over the course of the next spring. But in this case, we will actually have all of our U.S. surge forces, all of our tactical units, certainly, again, less the one headquarters is not required until a month after August, but on the ground by the end of August. And again, the July 2011 date is the date at which the process, again, begins that would embark on the, quote, responsible drawdown of the surge forces. So that's a pretty considerable period. Now, with respect to the density of forces, you have a situation in Afghanistan where there are a number of places that really don't require substantial numbers of coalition forces, and areas where, in fact, the Afghans, again, are very much in the lead. So this is about counterinsurgency math. We think we'll have the density once we get the additional forces on the ground, our additional U.S. forces, NATO forces, and then as we're able to ramp up the Afghan forces, as you know, by about 100,000 between the period of earlier this year and the fall of 2011.
All right. Thank you, General.
Thank you very much. Senator Inhofe's comment about the importance of the CERP program, I think, reflects the views of every member of this committee, and the reason why